Hello, my name is Michele, and you're listening to Profit is a Choice. With me today is Michele O'Connor of O'Connor Insurance Associates, located in Charlotte, North Carolina. Michele and I are going to talk about what insurance is, why we need it, and we're going to discuss the different types of insurance available. We're also going to discuss when to get insurance and when you use it to make a claim. There are so many different types of insurance, and knowing what serves our company best will allow us to make the best decisions to protect the business we're building. Every day, empowered entrepreneurs are taking ownership of their company financial health and enjoying the rewards of reduced stress and more creativity. With my background as a financial software developer, owner of multiple businesses in the interior design industry, educator, and speaker, I coach women in the interior design industry to increase their profits, regain ownership of their bottom line, and to have fun again in their business. Welcome to Profit is a Choice. Hey, Michele, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Michele. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Isn't it crazy? Hey, Michele. Hey, Michele. I mean, it's kind of weird sometimes to call somebody else by your name, isn't it?
It is. It is. And I was glad that you have a little bit more of a Southern drawl than I do, so they'll be able to differentiate our voices.
That's exactly right. And, I don't even think I have a Southern drawl. I mean, I know I do, but it's funny where I am from is even more Southern. You're in Charlotte, North Carolina.
I'm in Charlotte, correct. But I was raised in Western Pennsylvania, and I really haven't acquired much of a Southern drawl in all the years. And I've lived here longer now than I ever lived in Pennsylvania.
So I grew up in South Carolina, right under Charlotte, 45 minutes south of Charlotte. I think you and I talked about that before. And it is even more Southern in speech than I speak right now. So I've been in Atlanta, I want to say 32 years. And it's funny, when I go back home, they think I sound more Northern.
That is good.
Right? And then all of my Northern friends or California friends, like, you have such a Southern lilt to your voice. And I'm like, oh gosh, you should really go down into the deeper parts of the South, because this is not it. But it is. I do think it'll be a differentiator. So I think that'll be easy listening for everybody. Michele, one of the things that I really wanted to talk about, and we're going to get to it in a few minutes, is you're here to talk all about insurance and what it is and why we need it and how to find it and the different types. And I'm super excited for this conversation because it comes up everywhere. It comes up with my clients. It comes up in Facebook groups. It comes up in networking conversations. But before we do that, you're also the owner of your own company. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about your entrepreneurial journey and what prompted you to start your own agency and to go into business for yourself.
Sure. So I started in the insurance industry working for an insurance carrier, and I was trained by them and transferred to Western North Carolina with them. And then I was lucky enough to get transferred to beautiful Charlotte, where we've made our home for over 20 years now. But in the meantime, my husband was working for social services, and he was really wanting to get out of that and try something different. So he started working for an independent agent in Western Carolina. And when we moved to Charlotte, it was just the natural next step for him to open an agency. So he started our agency scratch, which means no clients in the insurance industry, and really just picked up the telephone in our spare bedroom and started making calls. And I stayed with the insurance company a couple of years, and I joined him in 2002. Our agency was opened in 2000. So we celebrated 21 years this year. And it's always an interesting journey as an entrepreneur. I think the last 5 years, I've probably learned more from a perspective of being a leader. And so my role has shifted into leadership. And that's been really exciting transition for me.
Oh, you may have to come back and we'll have to have a leadership conversation, because that's what we're working on in my private coaching right now and with my coachees and my designers inner circle. And we're talking about when you own a firm or an agency and you have people working with and for you. And it is our responsibility to coach and to lead them, not to just hire them, dump work on them and walk away. And it's so funny that you even say that, Michele, because so many people have said to me, especially the more that your company grows, almost 80%, 75 to 80% of the work can be somewhat HR related at the higher levels, because it's really about taking care of your people, and your people will take care of your clients.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And that is a whole, it's a whole different job description. And many people feel stuck in this, I need to lead my team. And I've never been taught how to lead in that way. They were very much self-starters. They moved up through the whole E-Myth, technician to manager to entrepreneur, without ever kind of maybe having some of that leadership training. And I know when I worked in financial software for 10 years, we went to leadership training. I was a manager of a software development team, and we were sent to leadership training. We were sent to managerial training. We had handbooks and notebooks, and, we practiced those things. And I see a lot of that missing, I would say, in smaller self-started businesses, because we're so busy at trying to get the work out. And not as focused maybe on developing the people.
That's so true. To your point, we have actually rehauled our, quote unquote employee review process. We're in the final stages of it right now to eliminate some of that review and to make it more of a developmental process, and a developmental process from an educational perspective as well, because now I do have a manager and I need him desperately, and he needs to be taught how to be a manager, because he's amazing, but now he needs those extra skills. So where do I find those? What resources do I have available to me as a small business owner?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Okay, so just know when we hang up, we're going to go reschedule and bring you on, because I'd love that conversation. I'd love to have it with you. So when we jump in here, let me ask you this too. We've all just been through the year of 2020, where I know you make comment that you've been listening to some of the podcasts, and I always end my podcast with the comment, being profit. Well, the name of the podcast is Profit is Choice. But then I always say profit doesn't happen by accident, meaning we have to be intentional in our choices and our decision making that lead us there. Did you find anything that you and your husband, your agency, had to do in 2020 to make some choices to remain profitable?
So 2020 was, of course, the year we'll never forget in so many ways. But last year at this time, the very first thing we did is start calling all of our business clients, because we wanted just really to check in with them and say, are you okay? What do you need from us? That was how it started out. Then it evolved into some hard conversations with our clients about things that weren't covered, because the pandemic was not considered a covered cause of loss for loss of use. And I know that's a lot of insurance speak, but basically the restaurants that had to shut down, they didn't have coverage because they were told to shut down because of the pandemic. So there wasn't an insurance reason for that loss. Those were super difficult conversations to have. So we spent a lot of time on the phone, and we probably worked more hours than I think collectively we've worked in years, because we were just constantly working, and working from home, it was easy to do that. So those were some of our harder business decisions. Initially, we stopped everything that we had made, we were making progress on, and we had big plans. And then it just took us a couple of months. By July, we had recollected ourselves, and we were like, this is not going to be the way this needs to go. We need to ramp up our marketing efforts. We need to spend more time with our people. We need to go ahead and hire the folks that we know we need. And I'm so glad we did, because on the other side of it now, had we not made those choices, we would be in a jam.
Yeah, it's true. I had some things that I was building and doing at the time as well. And I just put everything on pause, so that I could serve my clients and talk to them about how to weather it and how to get through, and what the new decision making might look like, and all of those things. Because in some cases, to your point, we had to make decisions to move forward in some ways that felt contrary to what we were seeing and hearing and thinking, or contrary to what we had thought before, and I know that we may or may not get into the depth of it, but I even had some travel insurance things that they considered the pandemic an act of God, or whatever. And it was like, sorry, not covering that, or because it showed up in the US at the beginning of January before it was on anybody's radar, you should have known about it and not booked your flight at the end of January. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Thankfully, most of the airlines stepped in, and they didn't want us on their planes right then anyway. So it worked out fine, and they certainly worked around it. But I think it took everybody by surprise in a multitude of ways. I even know I was changing my insurance, which is what we're going to chat on specifically today. And they sent a note and just said, we're going to give everybody, I think it was a renewal, but they were like, we're going to give everybody an extra month before you have to make that payment, because we know that, if you're in a position that business is slowing down or something's happening, while you need it, it's also a difficult payment to make when you're trying to keep the lights on and you're trying to keep your employees. And so I think we all had to make some really hard, difficult decisions in the grand scheme. And I'm just speaking from our industry. So I know that there are other industries that have just been decimated. Our industry has been very vibrant. And to your point, at the beginning, everything kind of like, whoa, everybody was like digging their little heels into the sand, pumping the brakes. And then all of a sudden, it was like the floodgates opened because people had money to spend in their homes and on their properties that before they would have spent on travel or buying a car or whatever, something else, that money that just would have gone in a different place. And so I think even more so now than ever, we better have ourselves covered. I mean, I really do. Even though I've always thought insurance was important, I've always had it since I started. I think even more so now, people are watching their money, they're watching their dollars. I think with the construction industry booming and going like it is, we have a lot of people coming in, not fulfilling, not doing. I mean, there's just so many areas open to risk right now that I think the timing of our conversation is super important. Before we jump into all the different types of insurance, I had asked you if you could share with us what insurance is. I think sometimes we have a preconceived idea of what it is, and we don't really understand maybe the basics of it. And we think that it should do things that it shouldn't, like the hard conversations that you had to have. Can you just share with us, Michele, like what is the basic understanding of insurance? And then let's layer on that, why we need it, when we need it, and those kinds of conversations.
Sure. So the most simplest definition of it is to indemnify you. So to indemnify you for some covered catastrophic loss would be the part I would add on to that. But indemnify you means to make you whole again. And so that's the goal of insurance, is to make you whole again. Specifically, when you had a covered insurance claim, which is the magic word there, is that it has to be something that is covered. But that's the most simplified definition. And that's across the line, no matter which product you're talking about, that's what the goal is.
All right. So let's break that down. What does it mean to make you whole? Because that can mean different things. And you see now, does it mean to make you whole from a depreciated value? Does it mean to make you whole from if you had to go out and buy it brand new? Like, what does make you whole mean? And I know it varies based on types of insurance, but in general, what questions should we ask about what level of indemnification, if that's the way that you say it, or what does it mean to make you whole in a situation?
Sure. So it is very, very dependent on the product and the specific scenario, but just talking in super broad generalities, if you had a fire in your office and all of your things were destroyed, making you whole again would mean to purchase the items that you had. Now, every policy has a coverage limit. So, if you've chosen 10, but it's going to cost $20,000 to replace the items in your office, then you're still only going to get $10,000. So that's where you having good, and I know that this is something that you pride yourself on helping your clients with, Michele, is making sure those business fundamentals are there. Because sometimes you'll ask a client, so, how much do you have in property in your office? And they have no idea. And so we can't figure that out. I don't know what your desk costs. You might have gone to IKEA and bought something really inexpensive, or you might have gone to a high-end designer and bought something that was extremely expensive. So you have to have that information to be able to make sure that your policies are set up properly, so that when you get to the place where you need to be indemnified, that you've got the right coverage in place. So that's one of the most important pieces of it. Okay,
that's perfect. I know living here in the South, just a couple of weeks ago, we had some rough weather come through and they were talking about tornadoes. And one of my really good friends is a financial advisor. And one of the things that she went on with her people immediately and said, if you have not done this in a while, take your phone, walk around, and they're in that tornado alley in Alabama. And she was like, walk around your home and start filming everything, save it to the cloud. If anything happens when these storms come through, it's going to benefit you to be able to go to your insurance company with pictures and videos, because there will be things you won't even remember. A total loss is one thing versus partial loss. But I remember back in the day, we were supposed to write everything down in every room. There's no way. I cannot keep up with all of that. And even if I had receipts, that's going to be great. But if a tornado hits my office, they're going to be scattered around a 16-mile. I'm not going to be able to go get them, right? I'm not going to have them. So what is it and what could we do? And I just thought about that because I think, this is even just a good prompting for me to step back and think, how can I go through the contents of my office, my workspace, take pictures and make note of what would it really take? I mean, I'm sitting here with 2 huge monitors. I mean, that's $1,000 just for the 2 monitors, plus the podcast equipment, plus the external keyboards. I mean, when I'm looking just at technology, I've got thousands of dollars just in that, and iPads and my Remarkable 2 and all the things. And that doesn't even get to anything else that I might have, the desk and the chairs. And I mean, you're right. It adds up so quickly. And we don't often think about having to really replace those. So it is a good idea probably to walk around our offices and our whether it's in our home or in an office building, and take some pictures and make note of that, so that when we look at the indemnify or the make whole amount, we're making it a decision on the amount with the forethought of what it is we really need it to cover. Okay, so having insurance is about making us whole again. When is the right time to use insurance? When do we call and say, I need to use whatever type of policy we have? I know there's a threshold. I mean, if it's going to cost me $300 to fix it and my deductible's $1,000, ding, 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 I'm not going to call. I mean, at least for me, from a profit perspective, I'm not going to pay $1,000 so that I can have a claim when I could have solved it for $300. So that to me is for the most part, it's a visible thing that we can see, it makes sense. But when we start moving past that, how do we make that judgment call to know when to actually, I guess, use the insurance policy?
So that is a great question, because we do get asked that frequently. And everyone, most policies have a deductible. So if we're talking about a property policy that's got a deductible, then you're right. That's an easy decision. It's under the deductible. There's no need to call the insurance company. Above the deductible gets into something that's way more subjective, because then you've got to truly make the decision for you and your business. Now, one of the things we like our clients to do is call us and have a conversation, because you can have a conversation with me without me reporting a claim, because we can talk that through and you can make that decision. So we encourage our clients to do that. It's just good. That's what we're here for, is to talk it through. If we had a crystal ball to know if you were going to have a tornado next week, then we would probably have a better answer for you. That's the unfortunate part. You don't know what's coming. So the way I usually guide my clients, if it's just above the deductible, then we have the conversation. Do you want to report the claim? Because now you're going to have a claim for, if you have $1,000 deductible and the damage totals $1,500, you're going to have a claim for $500 that paid out $500. So the more it gets above that, the more likely it is that you should turn the claim in. But then you also need to be smart about your deductibles. If you're not going to turn something in under $2,000, well, then you should have a premium savings and increase your deductible, because the higher the deductible, you're taking on more of that, then the lower the premium is. So it is a balancing act for sure. And I think having the conversation with your agent's usually the best place to start, because you can talk it through. If you've already had claims activity, you're definitely not going to want to turn a claim in that's only going to net you a $500 payment, because you've already got some activity. And then when you look at that collectively, it could impact your ability to get insurance.
Or to even just handle higher rates.
Right. That's
right.
Exactly
so if the rates go up, then over the year, it could actually end up being higher than the $500 claim that you made when it was a smaller amount. So just really being, I think, looking at it short term and then looking at over the long term, what might that do and how might that impact? And not every claim is the same. I mean, there are some claims that I think, like, if I'm even just thinking on the personal side, we had to have a roof for two times. We've had to have our roof replaced. One was hail damage. The second was because a tree fell on our house at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night. Well, there was no amount of us handling that when it broke the ridge beam across the whole back of the house. Insurance, I mean, it was huge. So insurance had to step in.
Right.
But we have had probably 3 floods in our house. We had one just the other day where something in the trap of the bathroom upstairs leaked and was coming down through the bathroom downstairs. We just fix all of that on our own. We call the plumbers on our own. We do whatever we have to do because it's not the damage isn't extensive enough to go through insurance. But when I think back even to just the roof and hail damage, in some ways, some of those things are so noted that they don't even hit the claims the same way as a normal use of an insurance policy would. So that's another great reason. And I know that's a home one, but it's another great reason to call and have a great agent and talk to them about it because they can help you think through. Is this a claim you should make? Is it one that you shouldn't? Could there be more extensive damage once they get in than what they know? And if you take it on your own, you're going to be liable for everything. And just help you think through what your risk is by doing it in either way.
Right. Now, the one exception to that is workers' compensation. When you have a workers' compensation policy, unless you've chosen to have a deductible, you have to report every claim. So every injury that you send somebody to the urgent care, you have to report it. And that gives the insurance company the ability to be involved right from the beginning of it, which is super important in a workers' comp. Now, you can choose to take a deductible in workers' comp. Most people don't. And most of the folks listening to your podcast probably have lower rates when it comes to workers' comp. They're not up on roofs, where it would be very dangerous. So there's some different levels there. But again, something you can talk through with an agent. We do have a couple clients that opt to take deductibles. They report the claim, but then they're going to pay up to $500 if somebody's got to run to urgent care and get, stitches in their finger or something minor.
Well, we do have listeners who are doing installations and they can easily be 20 feet up on a ladder in a family space. So not quite a roof, but darn near close in some cases. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And certainly their insurance policies are higher. So let's talk for a minute then about some of the different types of insurance. We have business owners policy. These were just some of the ones I threw out to you in my back and forth emails. We have business owners policy, general liability, professional liability, errors and omissions, which is a big one. That our people get hit with, the workers' comp, all of the different types. Can we just go through and break these down a little bit and kind of talk about what type of business might need that policy or might need a different policy?
Sure, absolutely. So a business owner's policy is a policy that combines both liability and property coverage. So simplistic example is my office space. We have a business owner's policy. So if somebody comes to my office space and they get injured while they're there, then the liability would take over. And there's other things that the liability policy covers, but just as a broad example. And then the property is going to cover the desks and the actual physical space of the location. So the business owner's policy combines both of those things. The professional liability is a really important one that, and depending on the industry, it can be more or less important. In the industries that you serve and the industries that we serve, it's been extremely important. And that covers your professional judgment. So if you make an error in your professional judgment, that's going to come into play. That policy, depending on what you do, can really save you a client, save you financially as well. So super important. Commercial auto is another one. If you have business vehicles that, whether or not they're titled in your business, which that's a whole nother deeper dive conversation about how they're titled. But if you're using them for business purposes, you should have a commercial auto policy. So if you are driving to and from a client's house, if you are delivering supplies in your vehicle, if you have employees who are driving your vehicle or their own vehicles, those should all be addressed on a commercial auto policy.
Now, let me ask you this real quick. When I had my business owner's policy, we had some of the auto use under that. Are there some that also cover it? So mine covered everything that I put in it, driving back and forth. And mine is not a Mine at the time was not, well, mine are not business owned there because I don't drive them enough for my business for that to make sense for me. But I did have some of that covered under business owners. So even if the bigger point here is you need to look to make sure the autos are covered, whether it is through a commercial auto coverage or a business owner's policy that has a rider or something else that covers it. I think what's most important, and I know this was a big aha for me 20 years ago, was recognizing two things. The type of homeowners that I had did not cover my business inside my home. It didn't cover it because it was a business. And so that was an important piece in that business owner's policy. And then to realize my auto didn't cover my car in the use of business.
Correct.
And so therefore, some of us can sometimes think when we're just starting out, well, I'm in my home, so anything in there must be covered, or I'm using my personal car for business, therefore it must be covered. And what you're saying to us is, number one, check your insurance policies, because in a majority of cases, that is not the case.
Mm-hmm. Correct. That is correct.
Okay. So then we would use what we used to lovingly call the BOP, or the business owner's policy. So if anybody ever hears it as a BOP, you'll know what they're talking about. But either that, or like you said, the commercial auto coverage for you or for those that are driving their own vehicles, right? Because that's important. Their auto insurance is not going to cover their auto if they have an accident in the course of doing business for your company in most cases.
So it may, if they have it, but you're making a big assumption that your employee's carrying it. You think people do. It's required by your state, but they may or may not be. So that's one. And then also your business will undoubtedly get brought into it in some way, shape, or form because it was in the course of it. So if they had like super low limits, then that would be a financial impact for you, because then of course you're going to get, they're going to come back to you after the fact. And then the other thing too, I don't want to gloss over, is what you were transporting. That is a conversation you have to have with your insurance company, because there's so many different things that interior folks could be transporting. And if they are transporting something that's valuable art piece versus they're transporting their own materials, those are two totally different conversations. But having an upfront conversation about what that is super important.
Great. Okay. I just wanted to stop there because that happens. And I can remember having window treatment installs that could have been $15,000, $20,000. And I had things in the back of a big SUV taking it. That was a big deal. I can remember when I had a drapery workroom and all of a sudden, all the fabric from an entire house would come in, and I would have to call my insurance carrier and say, I need to up my coverage, because it's not like I knew that on average, I churned and burned a certain amount through there of what we would consider other people's property because they had paid for it. So it wasn't my property in my place of work / living. It was other people's property in there because they had paid. And that's a difference too, when we're looking at our coverages, is what is really owned by Michele or by my business, and what is other people's property that is spending time in my place of business so that I can then take it to the next place. And we would have to raise and lower my, I would get like just special, I don't know, is it riders? Is that what it was? Or they would raise my limits for a certain amount of time and then go back down as I started getting things back out, so that I didn't have to, number one, carry too low of an insurance coverage or too high,
right,
for just kind of the normal ebbs and flow of my business.
Right. And that's such a great point, because those items are not owned by you. They're just in your custody, essentially, for the time being. And if the building burns down, you would want to be indemnified on behalf of your client. So those are really important things to discuss. And depending on, if you have an average with your clients, then you probably can leave it. But if you have some, like you said, extremely expensive coming in, yes, those are conversations you need to be having, and really need to be having them prior to you taking possession of it. Because one of the mistakes I hear our clients making all the time is calling us after they've done something, and then we can't give them the best guidance that actually would have saved them time, effort, and most importantly, money, because they didn't call us ahead of time. If they would have called us ahead of time, we would have given them different advice and been able to say, hey, let's creatively do it this way. And then that way you don't have to do X. But if you've already done it, now we just have to deal with what you've done.
Right. Or our options are limited. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we can't be retroactive on something if it happened. So that is a really good point. The timing of reaching out. And we'll touch on that in a few minutes, Michele, because I think that's why it's important to have an agent or someone that you can have these conversations with to say, help me make sure that I've got what I need in all aspects and when to know when to go higher or lower and whatever we need. Okay, so we've covered a business owner's policy, which is the combination of kind of that, you said liability, kind of general liability, if you will, and what did you say? The things that you own,
property.
Like property. Okay, so it's a combination of those two. We mentioned just general liability. Did we mention that one? I think we did.
Well, and actually that can be separated. So I'm glad you said that. So you can have a policy that is just general liability that would cover you when you were out at a location at someone's home. But most of the time people have enough property that it makes sense to put those policies together, and it can be more economical that way. So it just depends on your specific situation. But yes, you can splice that out.
Right. Then we mentioned professional liability, and I have professional liability for two reasons. Number one, with a podcast, right? We're out here, people listen to something, even though this is all educational, it's not meant to be instructive. I don't know anybody's business particularly unless I'm working with them. And even then everybody makes their own decisions. So I have professional liability as an educator and a podcaster and a coach, because I'm sharing information and you just don't know how people are going to use information. And then you mentioned commercial auto, which tied us back to the business owner's policy. Let's jump in and chat about errors and omissions, because I know some designers have that, some don't, some builders do, some don't. And it can be an expensive add-on or an expensive policy to what they already have. And so I know I've seen a lot of conversation online of should I, shouldn't I, when should I, when shouldn't I, and what does it really do for me?
Sure. So, in my humble opinion, if you choose not to, then you are basically self-insuring that aspect. So it could be damaging from a perspective of the client relationship if you aren't able to financially take care of the mistake you made. So let me back up and talk about a mistake you can make. If you're in a client's home and you misjudge, and even the material you mentioned would be a great example. If you misjudge the amount that you need, if you misjudge the one that the client actually selected, I'm sure there are a number of areas where you can make a mistake in your professional judgment on something like that, from measuring to selection. Those would be times where the policy would come into play. And so if you're not able to financially take care of that for the client, if you don't have it, that's what you're setting yourself up for. So if you do have it and you're able to turn the claim in, then it's a different conversation, because you hopefully can save the client relationship because you are able to financially take care of them when a mistake was made, because you've already made an error. It's already a bad conversation. And we're human, we make mistakes. So, that's most industries. There's not an industry that doesn't need professional liability. We carry it. Doctors carry it. It's referred to as malpractice on their end, but there's not a human being that doesn't make a mistake. So,
right. And the errors and omissions piece, I've seen things like giving flat quotes or flat rates and not realizing that there's a whole third floor of the house that you missed, or oh my gosh, I forgot this whole section of window coverings, or now the whole floor needs to be redone. And it's not something that would hit under a regular policy. It's a separate kind of thing. And so those things can be devastating for a small business. It can put some businesses completely under if where they're working and what they're doing is at a higher end and a higher cost than the money that they have saved or that they have access to in their firm.
Well, and unfortunately, it's also about your reputation at that point as well, because you don't realize how devastating it could be to your reputation for something like that to happen. And then financially, you can't take care of it. So you've got, just multiple problems. So the claims are not as common, but when they do happen, they're devastating. So it's kind of you don't have just like little ones, because little ones, most people just are able to take care of.
Right.
Right.
Oh my gosh, I forgot that one blind order. It's $600. I'll just order another blind and we move on. You bring up a good point that usually they're devastating. And I mentioned this to you. Well, before we do that, let me move on. Let's cover workman's comp and then we'll talk about the timing of, because that's where it's going to come into play. Talk to us about workman's comp, because I know this is another area where people go, I'm only a business of one or a business of two, and I'm only doing residential, not commercial. So therefore I don't need. And I know are most of these regulated by the states that they're in, different things that are needed based on the state that you're in?
The workers' comp is, but all of the other items are not. Though that's up to each individual business owner. So it is state specific. So you do have to know your state guidelines when it comes to workers' comp. But I will tell you, regardless of what your state guidelines are, when you hire the first employee, you really need workers' compensation. Because if you choose not to have it and your state doesn't require you to have it with that first employee, that employee can still get hurt while they're in the course of your employment, and you're still responsible for them being injured on the job. So not only do you leave yourself open, but as a responsible employer, I just don't find that to be a responsible business owner and employer, that you wouldn't take care of your employee if they're injured while on the job. You mentioned somebody on a ladder. We've had so many claims where people fall off of ladders. And again, you don't just twist an ankle most of the time. They're devastating. They've broken multiple bones in legs, back injuries, head injuries. Mm-hmm. It's terrible. It's absolutely terrible. So, and even a small step stool, we had a landscaper fall off of a small step stool and get injured badly. So you just can't estimate what will happen in the course of employment. If they're driving, there can be car accidents. That would be covered under workers' comp. So my recommendation is employee number one, you purchase workers' compensation.
That is not what we would all hear and know normally. And I think that is a great idea. Even when you think about it, for those of us that have had drapery workrooms, it takes 1 second to sew through your finger. And just to even have to stop and go to the doctor and get a tetanus shot should be covered by the company. And one of the first things they ask you, if you go to any of these places, did this happen in the course of doing work? And so it is really important to be able to cover that for your employees. We could easily staple ourselves when we're in design. I've seen people just hurt their backs carrying in some of the samples sometimes, or pull something and need to, go to a doctor for that, even if it's simply chiropractor or something, some pain meds. So we do really have to think about everything. Heck, in the Northeast with the snow that they've had this year, you could have easily an employee slip and fall trying to get into the doorway or stepping out of the doorway, and that would still be considered. I know both my sons work in construction, and, if they do anything on there, that is one of the very first questions that are asked is, did this happen at work, and what do we do from here? So, okay, so when we are going to get that first employee would be the time that we would really need to consider that. Let's talk about these others then. When is the right time to get insurance?
So I think everyone has different risk tolerance, and that, some people, risk tolerance for them would mean that they're totally comfortable if their home burns down and they don't have any coverage for the $10,000 of office things that they have, they're good with that. But other people, that's just out of the question. They don't want that. So then in that case, it's really when you start your business, that's part of it. And we always talk about when you start your business, you need an accountant, an attorney, and an insurance agent. But those three people should comprise part of your professional team that you surround yourself with, so that as you grow and as you continue to add employees or you're considering vehicles, you're consulting them to make sure at every level that you've got yourself covered. And then that's when you have risk tolerance conversations at each of those levels. Here's how you can do it if you'd like. If you choose not to insure it, then here's what you would be responsible for. So really out of the gate, when you start the business, that's when you should have the conversations. And at that level, the policies are pretty inexpensive. So it gives you a ton of coverage for dollars on the day.
Yeah, I know that was one of the first things I did was get a business owner's policy, because I kept thinking about the fact that I was either going to designers' locations, they were coming to my location, I was going into people's homes, just dropping a measuring tape on a floor and damaging a hardwood floor could require an entire floor to be done if it couldn't be corrected to make the homeowners happy. I mean, it takes a second. I mean, if anybody's ever had a toddler, it takes a second for anything to happen with them. Same thing with insurance. And I was fearful of somebody falling when they came and I had to go down to my workroom, or there were just too many openings for something to happen. All I could think about was what if I had all of their Scalamandre, fabric in my car and I had an accident going home from the appointment? Like, who was going to pay for that?
Right.
And I either had to have, as a profit first gal, I either had to have thousands of dollars set aside in my company to pay for something, or I needed to insure myself against that so that somebody else could help me pay if that were to happen.
Such a good point. Having the cash in reserve, such a good point, because if you don't, then the best option is to insure it because it's so inexpensive.
Because the last thing I want to do is have to close my whole business because I didn't make a smart business decision to protect what I'm building. That's the way my attorney talks about it all the time. She's like, Michele, we're just protecting what you're building. I think insurance is the same thing. It's saying one is saying I'm going to protect it legally. One is I'm going to protect it, if you will, financially in some ways. The accountant's protecting it another way financially. Why would we go through all of this if somebody could take it away, not intentionally, but in a moment because something happened, whether it was an intentional act or not? I've seen drapery workrooms. There was one just recently where there was a fire and it burned a large portion of the building. And now, even if it didn't burn fabrics, you got smoke damage everywhere. I've seen workrooms that flooded. I've seen design centers that flooded, or something happened, or a pipe burst, or any kind of thing. And we always think it won't happen to us. I would have never told you in all my life that at 3 a.m. when it wasn't rainy and wasn't windy, then an 80-year-old oak tree would land on my house. I wouldn't have told you. We had just had that tree checked 2 weeks earlier by the arborist who said it looked fine, but nobody knows what the root system looks like. So, again, you don't know when that's the whole reason that it's an accident, is we didn't see it coming and didn't know that it was going to happen.
Hey, so I'm so glad you brought up flood insurance, because we should just quickly throw this out there. Flood policies are separate policies. So they are not built into your business owner policy. They're not built into your homeowner's policy. They are separate policies. So unless you have purchased and paid premium for a flood policy, you don't have it. So that is such an important point, because in the South where we live, there have been some terrific rainstorms where the ground can't literally soak the water up fast enough. So homes that have not been in a flood zone, businesses not in a flood zone, have gotten flooded.
Texas just got hit with that the last couple of years. Some of the Midwest has been hit with heavy flooding over the last 5 years. Same kind of thing.
It's very unusual, but it is definitely something that needs to be considered and thought about long and hard, because if you're going to ruin all the fabric that you have in your workroom, it's devastating, and you're not going to get that be able to have coverage on your business owner's policy for flood.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so are there any other major types? I know when I kind of came at you in my email and when we first started talking, I'm like, boom, 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 boom. Are there any that we've missed or that we haven't talked about that we need to consider in this conversation, Michele?
There's two that are getting a lot of discussion that I've seen in lots of different business owner forums. One is employers' practices liability, and it's EPLI is the short term for it. But that is, when you have employees, that is protecting your employer decisions. That's what employers' practices liability is. So
it's almost like professional. It's like almost like professional liability, but from the employer side of things.
So that's helping you if someone sues you because they believe that they've been fired because of discrimination. If there's a sexual harassment claim and they don't believe that you handled it properly, those are the types of things that policy is taking.
Okay.
So very, very important in our litigious society to make sure that we've got ourselves covered as an employer. And then the other one is cyber. And that has been in the news probably about once a week, where, Target gets all of the credit cards stolen and all the information stolen. So cyber liability protects your business against that attack and that specific one. So it depends on what you're collecting, what information you're collecting of your clients. But if you're storing credit cards, if you've got personal identifiable information, which is birthday, social security number, name, address, of course, that you can plug those all together. If you're storing any of that in the cloud, on your computer, wherever you've got it stored, then you have the possibility of the cyber liability.
I think I had that as an add-on. I think it seems like when I got my insurance policy, they asked if I wanted to add that on.
Yes.
Yeah, I can see that.
And depending on the volume of clientele you have and how long you keep your files, you have more or less of a risks for those things. So, and even recently, insurance agents have been hacked to try to get into the insurance carrier systems. I mean, it's insane what's going on with some of that stuff and how much as business owners we have to do to protect ourselves to avoid that from being an issue. But certainly having the coverage is the ultimate way to protect yourself.
Okay. So that's a lot of different types of insurance. And certainly not every business needs every single one, perhaps, and maybe they do. I mean, if we just think back, based on what they store, they might need cyber. If they have an employee, they might need that, which then means they need workers' comp. They might need errors and omissions if they're out dealing with, especially large scale design that they cannot make up an error or an omission on their own out of their budgeted funds that they have. They might need professional liability if they're giving somebody a professional opinion of what should or shouldn't be done. And then, of course, the general liability and business owner's policy for their office space. And if somebody trips and falls, plus the commercial auto if they are driving their car. That's a heck of a lot of insurance.
You got it.
How do they budget for all of that? I mean, that's a lot of insurance.
It is. And it really depends on the size of the business, how to budget for that. Because, if you're just getting started, the budget's going to be a lot smaller than when you're 10 or 15 employees in, because the workers' comp rates are going to be more. Certainly your business will have scaled. And so you'll have a lot more assets that you're trying to protect. So unfortunately, I can't really give them a good budget.
Right. It's not a straight percentage or anything.
It's not. No, not at all. But it's the conversations and having them beforehand. So as you're getting started, trying to get your business off the ground and you're doing your research and putting your business plan together, that's a good time to reach out to an agent and just start to even get some ballparks, because they can give you ballparks off the top of their head without an in-depth dive, so that you have some figures to say, okay, here's where I'm at. It's going to be 1,000 for this, not 5,000 or whatever. So you've kind of got some budget ideas.
And then we could start building out that financial plan to allow for that. And I think that's one of the reasons it is so important when we, from the things that I teach on my side, is making sure that we know what the expenses are. These are expenses to the company, but these are expenses that I'm telling you, the cost of having the insurance is negligible compared to the cost of the claim.
Right.
And so when it's time to make that claim. So really making sure that we're protecting ourselves, we're saving for it. For those deductible amounts, making sure we have a savings account that has some money in it so that we can actually pay those deductibles, because you're in trouble if you can't do that. I mean, you're going to have to pay it. Just so many things, creating a budget, knowing that when we even create our pricing has to make sure to the homeowners or to those that we're serving that there is enough in that billable rate that will cover the overhead expenses of the firm so that we can do what we need to do to run well. One of the scarier ones that we don't even have time to even get into, but I want to bring it up for people, is the whole workman's comp conversation, because even if legally in my state, I don't need it. If I bring in X number of subcontractors who they don't all need it, but now I've got like 10 or more subcontractors and nobody needs it, I now need it because they don't have it. And so that's an add-on. I mean, you got to look at every single person that's working with and for you in most states, because again, independently, from my understanding, they might not all need it, but collectively, if we're all in under an umbrella, we might.
Right. And then more importantly, so what really comes into play then is a contract. And that is another conversation, but it is such an important piece of this is that if you're going to hire subcontractors, that you have a subcontractor agreement in place and that it's very clear that they have to carry workers' comp and that you are collecting a certificate of insurance from them that shows that they're carrying workers' comp. So that kind of has to be lock, stock, and barrel. And an attorney can help you with that with the guidance of an insurance agent to make sure that that's what it should be. Our folks that have those in place and are very diligent about it don't have issues with them. But you can also collectively, if you're the one hiring them all, then you become the one that's responsible for the insurance. So if you don't have that in place, they can be construed as an employee. And then that's when the state law would come into play. So it's a really slippery slope when you're hiring subs not to have it done correctly.
Mm-hmm. It's different when the homeowner is paying the contractor, but it is running through your business. That's when you really need to talk to your agent about all types of insurance, because there's so many things that are covered, and making sure that those agreements are in place so that because people are going to follow the dollar. They're going to follow whoever they paid. So if they paid me as the designer, they don't care about the subcontractor. They're coming back to me. If they paid the contractor, they're going to go there. So they're always going to, same with a drapery workroom. They are going to follow who they paid. And so we have to be prepared that if you're taking payment, are you set up legally? Are you set up with your insurance to handle any flow down from that payment?
Right. Absolutely.
For now and the future.
Absolutely.
All right. So tell me this, Michele. How do we find a great agent? What questions do we ask of an agent? Is it better to go with an independent agent? I know that there are all kinds of things. How do we start this if we're new to this? Or maybe we just have a general insurance policy, but nobody ever calls to us. They don't talk to us. We're just some random person out there. How do we navigate finding the you in our area that can have a conversation and help us, and that we know is not just trying to sell us the next thing, but really wants to help us work through our risk and our avoidance and our tolerance and all of that?
Such a great question. So I'm a big proponent of independent agents because an independent agent represents many different insurance companies. That's the big difference when you're talking about an independent. That's what they do. So we represent upwards of 10 insurance companies in our agency. Each one of those companies has different things that they're strong at. They're not all strong with all different types of businesses. So it's important that I have the ability to go to the company that's going to match what my client needs at the best price. And if that company can't do it, I can move on. So an independent agent can do that for you. They can do the shopping, if you will, for you. So the questions to ask is such an important point, because when you hire an agent, you are hiring a professional to be on your team. So you should be interviewing the agent to ask them the questions that you just said. Do they do annual reviews? Are those in person? Are they just via the computer? What kind of approach do they take when it comes to insurance? And the agent should be able to explain that to them, relatively easily. In our agency, we believe firmly in education. So I believe my goal is to educate you. Your goal is to make the best decisions for your business, but you can't do that if you don't understand what I'm asking you or what I'm trying to explain to you. So making sure you know your choices. So that's what I would be explaining to someone. Another agent may have a different philosophy, but you should be understanding that up front, how that's going to happen and what's going to go on behind the scenes there.
And then one question I also had, I know you and I touched on this earlier in a prior conversation. Not every agent can necessarily work in every state. They have to be licensed in certain areas. So we do really want to look for somebody who is licensed in the area that we live or the area that we serve where we need the insurance, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So insurance is state specific. And so lots of folks don't understand that. So they'll move from North Carolina to South Carolina and think their policies will just get transferred, when in fact they have to be canceled in North Carolina and rewritten in South Carolina because the state laws are different. So the agent has to be licensed in the state that they're doing business. Now, our agency is licensed in lots of different states, and lots of other agents are as well. But you're absolutely right. Making sure that they understand that component is super important. It's also much easier too, if you're able to put your personal and your business insurance together, it's much easier for you when there's overlaps for the agency to be able to handle those questions and conversations. And a prime example that happens constantly is, you go to the dealership and you buy a vehicle and maybe you put it in your business name, maybe you put it in your personal name, but that doesn't always clearly go back to the agency. So there can be some jumbled up things there if you don't have that all in one place.
Yeah. And I know that we have insurance in multiple places. Just number one, we've been in a house for so long and so many things. And some of the insurance that I need, the insurance carrier that we have for our home doesn't offer it. And so, trying to work around all of that.
Just one extra point, not necessarily the carrier, but that the agent is the same.
Okay, got it.
So that way, when you call me, if the dealership says, oh, she put it in her personal name and I look and you don't have a personal auto policy, I'm going to address that with you right away. Versus if your personal auto is somewhere else, that could be an issue.
So one person who's trying to help us look at all of it to make sure that we're covered in all areas and that we are staying consistent. Okay, got it. I'm glad you clarified that. One other question I'm going to ask you is, how often should we reshop our insurance, or how often? Because I know that we've had years where when I went back and reshopped it, it was a big savings for the exact same coverage. How does that process work on either reshopping it, talking to the agent, trying to get better pricing? Because sometimes it just keeps going up. And then if you start somewhere else, you start back at the bottom again.
No doubt. So it's kind of a double-edged sword when you shop it, because when you start out with a new company, you are new to them. So if you had insurance with an insurance carrier, and this is the reason I mentioned it, if you had insurance with the same company for 5 years and you have 2 years in a row where you have some claims, that insurance company is going to be way more forgiving of you because you've been a client of theirs for a while. So versus if you're brand new to a company and you have 2-3 claims, they're not going to be as quick to keep you as a client. They're going to say, we've collected almost no premium from them, and so we no longer want to do business with them.
Because they don't know your whole history and the fact that you just got hit all at once. Okay, that makes sense.
And they really don't care because you haven't paid them, even if you paid somebody else.
Right. So they're not, but I'm just saying, but they're also not willing to go, I can hold on with this person, because they're not like, a claim hog and they're going to show up every year with something else.
Right, exactly. But on the other hand, you're absolutely right. The premiums can continue to go up. So if you're working with a good agent, you should be looking at your stuff every year and you should be having those conversations. The agent should be able to say, yes, I've seen a rate increase with XYZ. We're going to look at 3 or 4 other ones behind the scenes for you. Let me get back to you and let you know. They should be able to help you have those conversations without you having to pick everything up and go somewhere else and shop it. So they should be knowing those things. And one of my carriers is super consistent. One of my carriers is hot and cold with things. And we know that. So if they are all of a sudden hot with landscapers and the prices are awesome, that's one thing. But all of a sudden they don't want them and they go through the roof, then we're going to the client and saying, we need to move you. They just shot their premiums through the roof and we don't know why. So that doesn't make any sense for your business. So you need to have that conversation. One of the big mistakes we see our clients making, though, is we offer to do reviews and they won't take the time to do them with us. And businesses change.
Oh, good point.
Constantly. So you may be thinking, oh, we haven't done anything. But in reality, you may have, added some things you hadn't spoken with the agent about.
But you know what, Michele? I think it's, even if the business didn't change, the world around us changed. So it may be that I didn't shift, but something around me shifted that now means that my coverage needs to be different. So I think we have to look at it both ways, right? Not just what's happening internally, but what's happening in the world externally.
Definitely. Great point.
Like cyber. Mm-hmm. That's not right. An internal decision that I did something. It might be I've done the same thing I've done for 20 years, but all of a sudden there's a risk external to my business that I need to be aware of and I need to plan for.
Right.
Awesome. Michele, this has been so helpful. You actually have made me just think about some areas in my own business that I want to step back and look at and rethink. And that's always the sign to me that I've had a really great guest on the podcast, because I'm like, okay, not that I don't learn something. I learn something every single podcast, But some podcasts kind of want to push you into action a little bit more and make you think about things. And you've done that for me today. And I really appreciate that. Tell everybody where they can find you. Where's your firm, your agency hanging out online?
Sure. So I am located in Charlotte, North Carolina. We are O'Connor Insurance Associates, and our website is OIANC like North Carolina.com. And it stands for O'Connor Insurance Associates, North Carolina. But 20 years ago, when we bought that domain, we quickly realized we didn't want to key that every time. So
I hear you. Well, and we'll have that in the show notes as well, so everybody can get in touch with you. But Michele, thank you so much for being on the podcast, for sharing all about insurance. And I'm excited that you're going to be working with some of my clients and helping us look through that a little bit more. And I hope everybody in the North Carolina area and surrounding areas that you serve gives you a call. So thank you again for being such a delight and so easy to talk to. And I love the educational aspect of your agency.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Michele. I'm super passionate about insurance, so I hope everybody enjoyed it.
We did. Thank you. Thank you, Michele, for joining us on the podcast today. As I mentioned, you have really given me some things to dig into and think about and look at for my own business, and just to make sure my coverage is adequate. And I know that our listeners feel the same way. Taking care of what we build is so very important. Otherwise, why are we doing it? Check out Michele's website to see if her firm can assist you. I really love helping business owners create strategies to make and save the profits in their company and to ensure that the best business practices are carried out. For more information on how to reclaim your time, pay yourself more, and grow your team intentionally, which is what I love to do, check out my masterclass, which can be found at scarletthreadconsulting.com/aim-masterclass. You can also find it under the resources tab. Save the profit you're building in your firm, because profit doesn't happen by accident. Profit is a Choice is proud to be part of the designnetwork.org, where you can discover more design media reaching creative listeners. Thanks for listening, and stay creative and business minded.